I have an interest in Australian history, particularly the 19th century and how it affects contemporary Australian society now. I draw on my cultural heritage, which is Kaurna, which is Indigenous to the Adelaide area of South Australia, as well as Maori ancestry to the North Island, and my iwi is Tylor. I also have English, Irish, Scottish, Dutch and Norwegian ancestry, and I really draw on my cultural backgrounds to inform my practice in different ways. I was interested in learning photography and being a war journalist, so I really like being able to cover issues that affect us in society, be it historical ones or contemporary ones. But I'm not really good at reading and writing. Like, I wanted to do history in high school, but my teacher actually deterred me from doing it because my reading and writing skills wasn't high enough, which is problematic in its own way. But I think that it kind of was good because I did end up starting to focus more on a visual. As I started to research at art school and learn a little bit more about my Aboriginal ancestry and the problems that we faced, even though that I grew up with very many of those problems and was already very aware of them, but I wasn't far enough removed out of them until I went to art school that I realised that they were problems and that was more important than going off to another country to look at conflicts when we actually have a very present conflict with the way that we address in non-Indigenous and Indigenous relationships, or the way that we engage with our own colonial history. I was kind of interested in starting to unpack it, and I think it started with photography. Now I'm branching out and looking at food and other things and making objects and teaching people as an educator, and it was an interesting starting point, but it's still something that I come back to, that I quite love photography. In my Unresettling series, I explored my Kaurna ancestry, which looked at relearning Kaurna practices such as making objects, all sorts of artefacts, as well as going out and building dwellings in the landscape and making different architectural forms such as fish traps. Kaurna people have been displaced off their land so that it could be taken up by farmers, and since then, because so much culture has been lost in the displacement, this process of research and making has really opened up my understanding of my ancestry. So there's this really amazing thing that only happens when you practice history rather than just read it in a book. I was really interested in doing hand colouring because my grandmother was a hand colourist, and I just really thought her photographs were beautiful, and it was a real amazing way to bring a black and white photograph away from the black and white documentary kind of aesthetic and just give it a little tone of being this is contemporary. I hand colour all my images to bring them to life. And I have done other interventions, as in Aotearoa Hawaii, which was a series where I went to New Zealand and I ripped the bottom of the photograph away of pictures of mountainscapes, which referred to removing the land out of the bottom of the image, because being a Maori person, I understand New Zealand to be Aotearoa Hawaii, which is the homeland of my ancestors, and Aotearoa meaning the land of the long white cloud. But I don't actually have a physical connection to that space because I grew up here in Australia. I then did a similar kind of journey looking at my Kaurna ancestry in my series Turili Indiyata, which directly translates in Kaurna to seeing yourself in the landscape, but it can also mean landscape photography as well. So it had a really nice double meaning. In this series I walked 300 k's of the 600 k's of the Kaurna boundary line and just took photos of the landscape around to understand where my ancestors lived. Because it's on the boundary line, I'm walking onto other people's language groups. I kind of wanted to reference those language groups as I was walking through, because they are shared spaces and we do share culture. So I put some Kaurna symbols which refer to the landscape, but also ones that refer to people of their landscape, of being Ngarrindjeri, Paramunk or Ngudjeri or Nukunyu. And so I had their symbols in ochre, which I got from the landscape and painted over the top of the image. I was really interested in making work about the Menindee Lakes, which since my childhood used to be full of water and quite abundant with fish and bird life, but in the last maybe 10 years, because of global warming and of El Nino and drought and water management by the government, the lakes have dried up. So in the economics of water, I was interested in referring to how the water had been basically used as a commodity, and for me that's money, and money refers to gold. So I decided to paint in different parts of infrastructure that's in the waterways that's diverting water away from the Murray-Darling into the Menindee Lakes, or vice versa, just keeping the water in the river, and talking about how people make money out of redirecting water for agriculture. I guess as my practice evolves and my interest changes, I tend to move towards looking and exploring other topics. So I've been looking at colonisation for maybe 5 years or 6 years within my practice, and it probably always will be informing my practice in some way, but people become more socially aware about the effects of colonisation, particularly non-Indigenous people, with Australia Day and the conversations around that, national anthem. Why people engage with it, I hope it's because they think it's important, but maybe it's because they think it's popular, I don't know, but it leaves people engaging with it. And I feel like I've helped to contribute a small grain of sand in the topic. But over the time of researching, I feel like I've evolved beyond it, and I want to look at other topics. Maybe it's cultural revival practices. There's still other things that need a bit of fostering, so I'll probably move over to those. And then hopefully all of our social issues are fixed, and then I can make just happy art. But I don't know.